Okay, so last time we left off, we were looking at how Patsy was being questioned about her handwriting analysis, and really the general line of questioning was more around if she wrote certain things in the book, and sort of walking down whether or not she believes what she wrote in the book or she agrees with it. And the frustration from my end was coming from the fact that she was no longer answering basic questions. It was a hesitation to answer any real question, which was a stark contrast from the beginning of the interview when she had a smug attitude. So here we go.
You were being asked for so many exemplars.
And here, you're not to give him, nor do I think he's asking you to give him any information about any discussion that you had between yourself and your attorneys. If there was any such discussion, he's not entitled to know that, and he's not asking about that.
Was there anybody else, for instance, maybe Lou Smith may have asked you, maybe somebody from Alex Hunter's office might have asked you or told you or whatever, something that's not a privileged communication between you and your attorneys, if you remember?
No, just every time they asked me to do it, I willingly gave it.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you about your reaction to that. Were you surprised that you were asked for so many exemplars, to come back 5 times, in fact? Were you surprised by that? Were you concerned about that?
I was not concerned particularly.
Do you know if anybody at any time expressed an opinion as to whether you were the author of the ransom note that while you were doing this?
During the handwriting exemplar process?
Yeah, when you were being asked to give handwriting exemplars, did anybody in law enforcement express the opinion that they thought you were the ransom note writer?
I don't recall them ever saying that.
Do you know whether or not anybody ever expressed the opinion in front of you that John was the ransom note writer?
I never heard anyone say that.
Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I need some, we're going to go through a little housekeeping. I'm sorry, I just have to do this for purposes of laying foundations.
Before he gets to that, I just want to say and make a note that this is relaxed Patsy. Typically, you're used to seeing Patsy defensive and angry and on the attack. This is Patsy now relaxed. And what's unfortunate a lot of times in these situations is that these are legitimately cool people that otherwise in any other situation, you'd probably have no problem with. You'd probably see her at the grocery store. She'd probably have a big smile on her face. You know, you'd probably be like, man, she's, you know, one of the sweetest people that you probably would ever meet. But because of the situation, those reflexes are heightened to have to defend herself. I mean, and rightfully so. But it's just unfortunate that these kinds of situations happen to sort of bring undesired traits out of people.
I'm going to ask you to mark these as exhibits and Lynn, I'm going to give you a copy.
Okay.
This is for identification purposes. Here, Lynn, if you want to look at that.
Is there a way to relate this to the exhibits?
What I'm going to do is basically, I would like to show these to Mrs. Ramsey at this time and ask her, one, in a foundational way, whether she recognizes what she's being shown. Can she identify it, and can she identify the handwriting?
Okay. Are these the exhibits that are attached to the first set of? Do you have them by exhibit number?
No, I don't. No, I don't. Right now, I'm doing it in a particular order, which doesn't relate to that. Whether these ultimately are used or not is another matter. But right now, I'd like to. Could you just mark this as exhibit 1, please, or you want me to do it? Yeah, I'm assuming they're using A, B, C, and I'll be using 1, 2, 3. Okay. Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to show you a document that has been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 1 for identification. And I'd like you to look at it and take your time. And I'm going to ask you if you recognize the photograph.
And let me just say this for the record, Darnell.
Yes.
I think that you have given her an enlarged copy of what was possibly one of the exhibits to one of the reports that you filed early in the case with respect to your mandatory responses. And I think she has answered in request for admissions to her best ability whether she could decipher from those copies whether she was the author of the handwriting. To the extent that you are giving her the same exhibits but in a different form, either larger or in color versus black and white, etc. Just want to make sure that if there's any confusion down the road between her ability to try to decipher it now and what she looked at then, that might be the explanation.
Well,
and so that's why I had asked if you wanted to present her with the actual exhibits that would.
Well, I
think
actually,
help
no,
us
I want to be able
look at
to,
the same thing.
I basically want her to be able to see what it is. I'm looking for content, not for
comparison with
no,
other
it's not comparison.
copies of those
Just
from
merely
other
want
sources.
her
Okay,
to
that's
indicate
fair.
whether she recognizes the photograph.
That's fair.
I think I've seen this photograph before.
Can you identify, without naming anybody in the photograph, can you identify any of the individuals in the photograph?
Just Jean Monnet.
Okay. I would like you to now look at the handwriting below the photograph. Do you recognize the handwriting?
Not particularly.
Do you, so you say not particularly, you don't recognize this as being your handwriting, is that correct?
I don't remember writing it. Is that what
Okay.
you mean? I mean,
But-
I don't know. I may have.
All right, but do you recognize the handwriting as being your handwriting?
No.
Okay. Now we're going to go to another exhibit. I'll leave this with you right here. Okay, now, if you could mark this exhibit 2. Lynn, here, I'll give this to you.
Oh boy.
There we go. Thank you. Now, Mrs. Ramsey, I'd like you to examine a document that I've given you that's been labeled Plaintiff's Exhibit Number 2 for identification. And I'll ask you if you recognize any of the photographs in the document.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask you if you recognize any of the handwriting in the document.
Recognize it as mine or someone else's? or
Now
just-
I'll go to the next question. Do you recognize any of the handwriting as being your handwriting?
Not particularly.
So you ain't wrote nothing a day in your life. You can't even recognize your own hand right now. I don't know what I wrote. Of course not. Of course not. I if you leave it up to me, I didn't write anything. I don't recognize anything that I wrote. This is crazy.
So you couldn't say with any degree of certainty that that was your handwriting.
No.
Thank you.
It's
All right,
crazy.
I'm going to, Lynn, I don't know what you're doing with those. Do you need
Well, you
copies,
took the
Lynn?
last one back.
Yeah, okay, fine. Now I'm going to ask sorry about this. This is one of the more boring parts of depositions. I'm going to ask that this document be marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 3 for identification when here.
I think we have it.
It's 2 pages.
Now, Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to look at Plaintiff's Exhibit Number 3 marked for identification and ask you whether or not you recognize this document.
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize it to be?
an entry form for the Boulder Christmas Parade.
Have you ever seen this entry form before today?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell me when you've seen it, if you remember?
Well, I obviously saw it to fill it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then that was my next question. Do you recognize the handwriting in this entry form?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell me whose handwriting you recognize it to be?
My handwriting.
So all of the handwriting on both pages is your handwriting, is that correct? I mean, no one else.
Well, this on the second page is pretty blurry, but I believe it is mine.
Okay, so nobody at this event filled in part of it for you?
No.
Okay, you filled this in completely yourself,
Yes,
is that
I did.
correct? Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to show you another document, which I'm going to, if you don't mind, have the reporter mark as Plaintiff's Exhibit 4 for identification. Thank you. There we go. Now, Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to look at a document that I've handed you, which has been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit number 4 for identification. And I'm going to ask you whether or not you recognize this document.
No, I don't.
Okay. I'm going to ask you if you recognize the handwriting in the document.
I recognize my signature.
Do you recognize any other written part of the document as being your handwriting?
It looks similar, but I can't say for sure.
Okay, so are you uncertain as to whether the additional handwriting is yours or not, outside of the signature?
Yeah, I'm uncertain.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
There's a another shift in energy here. She's starting to close up a little bit. There's starting to be more of a hesitancy toward like fear of making a mistake. It's like the more he asks questions, the more his logic might be penetrating my defense. And I know I have my counsel here, but I'm not sure just how exposed I am. And so there is a lot of uncertainty around this line of questioning because I don't know what's going to lead to trouble in the future.
I'm going to ask the reporter to mark this as Plaintiff's Exhibit number 5 for identification. And
it's like you can hear the uneasiness in the air. You can hear it.
Now, Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to look at a document which has been labeled Plaintiff's Exhibit number 5 for identification. I'm going to ask you whether or not you recognize it.
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize it to be?
Looks like a greeting written on the inside of a Christmas card.
Do you remember writing a Christmas card like this?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask you whether or not you can identify the handwriting.
Yes, I can.
Can you tell me whose handwriting you believe it to be?
Mine.
Thank you very much. Okay. Going to ask the reporter to please mark this document, Plaintiff's Exhibit number 6 for identification. Thank you. It's 2 pages, I believe. I'm going to ask you, Mrs. Ramsey, whether or not you can identify the document that I've handed you, which is marked Plaintiff's Exhibit number 6 for identification.
Yes.
Can you tell me what the document is?
It's a handwritten note.
Can you identify the handwriting?
Yes, it's my handwriting.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to ask the reporter to please mark. This is Plaintiff's Exhibit number 7 for identification. And I'm going to hand this to Mr. Wood.
Walking her down nice and easy. Not going too fast, but I'm being very meticulous in, all right, let's get this next document up. Let's get this next exhibit up. Do you recognize this? Yeah, I do. Boom. Do you recognize this? Boom. Because I don't want to go test something and say, and test your handwriting analysis or whatever I need to do in the future against something that you say, oh, I don't recognize that. That's not my handwriting. Or I don't know what you were talking about, because they're setting up to do a lot of that. And so that's where you feel a lot of the pullback in Patsy, is that she's watching very closely, very meticulously. She's watching what I should and should not say yes to, because maybe I don't know everything that could be used against me in the future, but I know you guys are setting up to use something. I don't know what I know and what I don't know, but I'm watching everything that I'm doing to be careful. When in doubt, just say no to everything.
Mrs. Ramsey, I'd like to know if you can identify the document, or actually the image or figure, on Plaintiff's Exhibit 7 marked for identification.
No, I can't.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to look at the handwriting and tell me if you can recognize the handwriting.
This is such a bad copy. Do you
No, I
have the
understand.
original?
No, I don't. If you can't recognize the handwriting, you can just simply say, no, you cannot.
I cannot.
All right. Thank you very much.
And she's frustrated because she's scared, which is why you heard, this is such a bad copy. Do you have the original? She's just frustrated by little things here and there outside, because she's so focused. So anything outside of that focus frustrates me.
Okay. I'm going to ask the court reporter to mark this document, Plaintiff's Exhibit number 8 for identification. And Mr. Wood. I'm going to direct Mrs. Ramsey's attention to the writing that's what looks like is on a box. It says Ramsey Xmas, and then also looks like some writing on the lower right-hand side, which just says Ramsey. I'm going to ask her to look at that carefully. And I'm going to ask her, first of all, if she can identify to the best of her ability what is in this photograph.
It looks like pictures of boxes taken through a window pane.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you if you can recognize any of the handwriting.
This lower one may be mine, but I'm not sure.
Okay. And the upper left, it says Ramsey Xmas.
I don't know.
Okay. So you don't recognize it as being your handwriting?
Not specifically, no.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Coming to the end, I'd like the reporter to mark that as Plaintiff's Exhibit number 9 for identification. Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to even try to ask you what you're looking at. I'm just going to ask you if you can see any of the handwriting in this document.
Is that an admission that nobody can even determine what the object is?
Well, the objects would be subject. One looks like a box at the lower part, but I'm not going to ask Mrs. Ramsey to determine. I'm just wondering if she can make out any of the handwriting. And if she can she with any degree of certainty tell me if she recognizes any of the handwriting?
It's pretty hard to tell.
Can just simply say no or
No.
you're not certain. Okay. All right. Well,
I
thank you.
could see the original maybe.
No, I understand. But based on this document, you're not able to.
No.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now.
You see, she keeps rolling her lips or she keeps pursing her lips together. Sometimes that could be self-soothing, but I believe in this specific instance, obviously, like we mentioned, uncertainty, hesitation, and extreme focus. So I think it's probably more aligned with a little bit of self-soothing, maybe, but more so in trying to calm herself down, trying to remain calm under a lot of pressure, but really more so the focus and the hesitation. Like I said, she's walking through. It's like she feels like she's in sort of like this field of landmines. And so she's trying to walk through it very easily.
Okay, I'm going to ask the reporter to mark this as plaintiff's exhibit number 10 for identification.
Resituating.
Okay. Mrs. Ramsey, what I'm showing you is a series of letters, and I'm not identifying their source. I'm just simply showing you a series of letters. I'd like you to look at them carefully.
Lip roll again.
Again, this is plaintiff's exhibit number 10 for identification. And
you can see right around this area, she's going like that. And she's staying up here, almost like she's pushing back against it. It's like she's pushing back against whatever's coming next. Like a lot of nervousness and anxiety creeping up.
You, without knowing the source or where these letters are from, identify any of them?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, I'd like you to also look at the letters and ask me if you see any similarities in the way in which these letters are written. And we'll just start from the bottom, looking at the B. B.
Ask you if I see any
No, I'm going to
similarities?
ask you to comment on whether you see any similarities in the handwriting.
Well, let me just ask you, Darnay. I mean, Patsy Ramsey is not a questioned document examiner.
I just want her personal observation.
We don't know what alterations have been done to these documents. I know where these documents came from. They came from one of your experts, and I think they're both.
I would prefer that you don't identify the source.
Why not?
For the purposes of
She's
this
entitled.
demonstration.
No. We're not here to play games.
No,
She's
no,
entitled to know.
Mr.
No,
Wood.
let me finish,
No, no.
Darnay.
Mr. Wood.
Let me finish, please.
You can't have a standing objection where you basically counsel, give information to your client in your objection, which is what
Darnay.
you're doing right now.
All right.
And I would like you to stop it.
No,
I have a right to show her. For all you know, I'm trying to test her perception. You don't know what I'm doing
Her
with
perception.
this. I'm not saying that this means anything. I'm asking her to look at these letters, ask her if she recognizes any of them.
You wonder why people are upset. This is the second time people have been interviewing them. And here we go again. The second time that I've noted throughout this series that people have started to push back and get frustrated. When people you're talking about, the Ramseys are notorious for talking about you're not trying to get to the bottom of this. And here they are trying to get to the bottom of it. And the lawyer is coming out of nowhere with some nonsense that has nothing to do with any. Oh, you're questioning her in this way. How do I even know that your questions are relevant or have to do with this? You're getting in the way. of sound logic questioning, because he probably reads on Patsy that there's some sort of, uncertainty and hesitation and some sort of a certain level of uncomfort. And she might be, it's a reset is really what it is. It's a reset. Let's reset to kind of get ourselves balanced. But I want to make sure, right, that you're not going to talk to my client and sort of trick my client into certain things. So just so we know, so we set the record straight. So if we get in court later on, we can deny anything that we don't agree with and have it on the record showing that.
And then after doing that, asking her if she can perceive any similarities in these letters. That's all, just as a layperson, her personal observation. And I have a right to do that, and I'm going to ask her to do it. I don't have to identify this. This could be an eye chart for all you know.
Right.
All right. For all you know, I'm testing for perception.
Darnay. Mm-hmm. It's not an eye chart. It's a document.
No, it's not. Don't identify the document, Mr.
Are you going to let me finish, Darnay?
No, because earlier on in the conversation, before we even got started, right, you were trying to say, do not in any way, her lawyer was trying to say, do not in any way try to manipulate my client into saying something that could be used against her, right? Do not try to, because I think it was Mr. Wolf. They, were asking questions about Mr. Wolf, and he has at this point he has a libel claim or suit that he's trying to bring against them, and they're saying you cannot ask questions, or I have the right to shut down any questions that might give weight or give precedent or give credence to his claim of libel coming from the Ramseys. And so, or any sort of defamation coming from the Ramseys. And so you reserve the right as their lawyer to shut that down. I also, as the depositioner, reserve the right to shut down any way that you're trying to sort of bring in bias so that she knows, okay, this is coming from this kind of source. I can watch how I say things more clearly, more specifically. So it's kind of like an unspoken statement. If I say like, hey, the police are coming. If you're doing illegal activity, then I just said the police are coming. I didn't do with that what you will. So now you know to stop. And so when the cops come, you're like, oh, I wasn't doing anything. Well, you were, but somebody gave you a heads up. Right. So
not if you're going to identify things. Not if you're going to have a standing objection.
We're going to take a break now. And
all right.
I'll come back, and when I get a chance to make my statement on the record, to perfect the record, we'll start again. But if you're not going to give me that fundamental right, then we're not going to start again, Darnay. Do you understand me? Because you're not the judge.
If you want to stop, stop the deposition. All right. Well, first of all,
if you don't stop interrupting me, we're going to have to stop.
I have to interrupt you if you are in fact going to give your client information that you're not supposed to give your client while I'm asking her a specific question, which is what you're trying to do right now, at least
no, I'm not.
Yes, you are. You're trying to identify. I know what you're doing. You're trying to identify the source of this, and I don't want you to do that for the purposes of this a question.
We're going to take a break now, and when I have the ability to make my record without interruption and instruction,
I'd like you to make the colloquy
without. You're just not going to stop interrupting, are you?
I'm not going to let you basically give your client information in a standing objection.
Darnay, if I make a statement on the record that is inappropriate, you may take that up with Judge Carnes, and Judge Carnes can determine whether I have inappropriately instructed my client through an objection. But you are not the judge.
But we're not going to let you bias your client. It doesn't matter if the statement is on the record. I'm not going to let you bias your client into something, is what you're trying to do.
You're not going to make that decision today. You have the right to say what you want to on this record. I have that right also. So when you decide that we're going to play on that level playing field, let's get started again. But you're not going to sit here and be the judge and tell me what I am going to do or not do, whether you like it or agree with it or not.
Now, Mr. Wood,
so we're now going to go off the record and take a break.
Now, Mr. Wood, for the purposes of before we go off the record and take a break, I foresaw this as a possible stumbling block or speed bump. And as a result, Evan Altman was kind enough to call Judge Carnes' office, and she is willing, in a phone call, to make an immediate ruling on whether or not what I'm asking Mrs. Ramsey to do is proper, and whether or not your objection is proper. She is in her office. She is available for an immediate conference.
I have not been allowed to make my statement. And if we want to address with Judge Carnes at this point, excuse me, if the issue to be addressed with Judge Carnes is whether I'm allowed to make an objection without interruption from you, then I will be happy to take that up with Judge Carnes. If we're going to take up an objection of mine with Judge Carnes, I think I fairly ought to have the right to state it on the record.
No, but I would like you to make the statement to Judge Carnes before you make a statement in front of your client on the record, basically notifying your client of precisely what it is that I'm doing with respect to this, which I don't
know
want
what
you to
you're
do.
doing with this.
Well, yes.
I'm not trying to make a representation of that.
Let's talk to Judge Carnes, because we went to enough trouble to call her office yesterday and see if she was available for a conference, because I foresaw this problem precisely coming up.
I yet to understand what you want to take up with Judge Carnes.
Well, let's call her. I'll tell her. I quite frankly, I'm going to ask her whether or not I'm going to have you state your objection that you're going to give on the record to her on the phone, and we're going to find out whether or not she thinks it's proper for you to make that objection. And then if she rules that it is proper to make it in that form, you can make it in that form.
So you want me to state my objection for the first time on the phone with Judge Carnes? So
That's
you're going
correct.
to call Judge Carnes to, excuse me, you're going to call Judge Carnes to address with her an objection that you think is inappropriate that I haven't even been allowed to make yet?
No, you started to make it, and it was clear from your making it what you were trying to do, which is basically make the equivalent of a standing. You're trying to give your client information improperly in order to influence her answer. That
is just fine. Pure bunk, don't
Well, sorry, that's what I see it to be. That's why we have Judge Carnes waiting by the phone for
if you have an issue to take up with Judge Carnes, you have the right to do whatever you want to do. I don't have an issue with Judge Carnes yet.
Well, you may have it if you don't get on the phone with us and talk.
I'm going to participate. I'm not going to allow you to ex parte a conversation with Judge Carnes.
She wouldn't allow it either. No judge would allow an ex parte communication. You know better than that.
Why don't we define so that we can read the record to her exactly what the controversy is at the moment? Because I still don't understand it, because I haven't been allowed to state an objection. I may not even have an objection.
In fact, I'd like you to read back what you were about to state as an objection. In fact.
Okay. I started off and said, you said the question to Ms. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to comment on whether you see any similarities in the handwriting, and that's on this exhibit number 10, without identifying it for her. And I said, let me just ask you, Darnay, Patsy Ramsey is not a questioned document examiner. Mr. Hoffman, I just want her personal observation. Mr. Wood, we don't know what alterations have been done to these documents. I know where these documents came from. They came from one of your experts, Mr. Hoffman.
That's the point at which you're starting to give her information.
Mr. Hoffman, I would prefer you don't identify the source. Mr. Wood, why not? She is entitled to, and then you interrupted, and I don't think we
This is the area that
so
we
the question
have our
is whether or
conundrum.
not, when you give her a document, is she entitled to know the source of the document before she answers questions about it?
No.
Let's put that issue before Judge Carnes.
Okay. Yep. And we're going to read that statement. That's what I'm objecting to, what you're doing there. So that we'll read that to Judge Carnes.
I think I understand what we want to do with Judge Carnes.
All right, let's do it.
When you question her about a document, she's entitled to know
No, a
what the
particular
document
type
is.
of document. Okay, not
She's
all
entitled to know what
documents.
the document is.
Video record.
I'm on your case. I'm on your case. Because Mr. Hoffman's pretty good, because he wrote these questions line by line. Boom, 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 because I'm trying to get to something. When we talk about detective work and we talk about somebody trying to be a good detective, I think this is part of detective work. And we can clearly see in this instance somebody getting in the way of detective work. Number one. Number two, as corrected, Mr. Hoffman foresaw this from their attorney and said, hey, in the event that something like this comes up, can we call you, Judge, in order to get clarity on what is in play and what is out of bounds? Mr. Wood, totally blindsided by the intelligence of Mr. Hoffman, gets even more frustrated and says, you know what? I don't even want to talk to the judge, quite honestly, but he knows he has to. He's just trying to put up a fight and smoke and mirrors. You know, he has to. Like, there's no reason not to be cooperative and speak with the judge before you even present this on the record. I'm not going to allow you. It's like being because bias is bias. It's like being in a courtroom and having all 12 jurors in there, and then you saying something, and then we're saying objection, strike it from the record. I mean, well, dang, they already heard it, right? So that's going to go, well, we can't legitimately, consider this in our ruling, but there is a way possibly that we flip it into our ruling now that we know the information, right? And so there's a lot of prevention of bias here that Mr. Hoffman is trying to do because he knows the nature. And I think at this point, people are starting to catch on to what the Ramseys are doing in terms of blockading and preventing people from doing their job. So that's the video. I'm going to come back, continue with this. Like I said, pretty long interview. Going to come back and continue with this. Up to this point, like, share, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think. And until next video, take it easy.